Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Landlord Live. This is episode number 69. My name is Eric Worral of rentprep.com, and I am joined by my two co-hosts, and we're in a different order today. So, Jen, you're still in the middle. Jennifer Ruelens of Fish Property Management. How you doing, Jen?
Good morning. Happy New Year.
Yay! And Andrew Schultz of Realty Edge, an associate broker. How you doing, Andrew?
Good. Good morning and Happy New Year.
Yes, Happy New Year to you both. And it's a new year. So, there's plenty of new questions, new things going on as far as for landlords, property managers, investors. And what we're going to be doing is taking a look at some news stories that have popped up over the last week. And I will present the stories and you guys will share your insights and thoughts on those. And if people do have questions while we are live here, you can always ask those and we can pull them up on screen as we go. So the first one that I'm going to start with here, let's see if I can pull this up on screen here. I got a little Twitter link that I'm sharing here, and this comes from the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. So as we know, the government is in a shutdown right now, and what this Twitter account did that is run by the U.S. Is they posted a link of sample letters that you can give to your creditors, whether that be a landlord, a mortgage company, and basically these letters are requesting leniency on payments, and maybe you can create a payment structure because currently I'm not making any money because I'm working for the government and my job has been furloughed. So my question, what I'm wondering is if you two have ever dealt with this type of situation before with a renter and how you dealt with the situation or how would you deal with the situation. So we'll work left to right. Jen, have you ever dealt with a furloughed employee before?
Yeah. When I ran properties in Pennsylvania, and I was trying to think of it this morning, it was like an 05, 06, 07, somewhere around there. I want to say it was like a month-long shutdown. It was a couple of pay periods. And in that case, I worked for a larger property management company then, a multifamily company, and we made a decision as a company, because we were all there around the state capitol, that we would make, and I don't even remember what the arrangement was, but we made some sort of policy, and I think it was reduced payments, and what was postponed had to be on a written payment plan, something like that. And this morning, we discussed, because we've been on kind of holiday here, and we said, hey, are we getting any kind of communications from people here where we are? We don't have state employees for the most part. We don't have government employees. And so we are going to take it on a case-by-case basis. We're not going to do a policy. I do. And when my employees kind of looked at me and said, well, why? Why are we doing it this way? I said, well, you have to understand, we deal with economic factors related to these colleges all the time and our microeconomy. If I'm making my money sitting next to a military base or a capitol or something like that, then I think I am in the position where I have to kind of think about it and work with it. But I don't know that the government's really, I think it's great that they're encouraging people to talk about these debts and not just let it go, not just ignore it. Yeah, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think some people in the Facebook group were kind of seemed like they were turned off by it, because I think also there was a separate news story that they were encouraging talking with your landlord about doing work on the property.
I did see that. Yeah. And I guess you can get a little up in arms about, like, the government's telling my tenants not to pay. And I think some people, some employees of the government probably think, well, if I'm not getting paid, they're not getting paid. And I think it's just good to have the communication. And then us landlords need to figure out what we're going to do.
Yeah. Andrew, what were your thoughts when you saw some of those posts being shared to the group about just do work on the rental to pay for your rent?
We don't ever allow tenants to do work on any of our rentals to begin with, because it's just asking for just a whole slew of headaches and problems and everything associated with it. No liability, no written agreement, this, that, the other thing. It could get really messy really quick. Yeah. We have a few tenants who are military that actually I went in and checked this morning, and their rents are paid. So fortunately, they must have had some cash reserves and they were able to put some cash into their rent, which is great. I also just checked, and our Section 8 payments came through. So at least the Section 8 housing payments aren't furloughed along with, some of these employees and things like that. So that's a positive.
Okay. Yeah. The Jen actually here, she was saying probably a sentiment that's shared by a lot of landlords is just because they don't get paid doesn't mean we can afford to not get paid either. Kind of the same situation as losing a job and can't pay, so you can't stay. Now, Jen, I believe she's out pretty close to DC, so her markets might be pretty impacted by this government shutdown. Also, one of the things I was just thinking of, like, it sounds like maybe some of your military runners might have a decent emergency fund. Is that anything that you guys ever consider when you're screening applicants? Is that, I know a lot of times you talk about a rent to income ratio, but like, seems like it'd be pretty personal if you're getting into emergency fund accounts. Yeah, no.
Yeah, no, we don't usually, unless it's like somebody who's self-employed. I guess it wouldn't matter in this instance, but unless they're like self-employed, chances are we're not looking at their bank history and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I mean, Jen does raise an excellent point though. Like if you're a landlord that has one or two properties that you have a military family in, that could be astronomically detrimental to your financial well-being. So hopefully your tenant has an emergency fund, and then hopefully you have an emergency fund on top of that to kind of prevent these bad things from happening. So it could be a real sticky situation in this when you get into these furloughs, and depending on how long it goes, it could turn into a much bigger situation. The one thing I did hear, and I don't really have confirmation on this, but I spoke to a friend who's in the Navy and has accounts at Navy Federal Credit Union, and he was saying that they are actually the Federal Credit Union is continuing to pay them as though their paychecks were coming in, and then when the actual paychecks come in, they're just going to pull the money back out at that point.
It's a nice nice plug for that credit union. That's
Yeah, right.
We're doing that. All right, this next topic, it's a little juicier, but we're talking about criminal justice reform and impacts on landlords. So I'm going to pull this one up onto the screen. Let's see if we can make this solo here. So this is talking about the First Step Act, that the Congress Criminal Justice Reform Bill. Basically what this is, and I'll kind of skip down to the bullet points, is what it does is it's looking at on a federal level, having some criminal justice reform that will help to ease up restrictions on currently incarcerated individuals. And it looks like it's kind of focused on the disparity between crack and powder cocaine substances, and also reducing long-term judgments on as far as how long people are incarcerated for, and then also some good time credits so inmates can earn additional days off of their incarceration if they are in good standing with the prison, and then also earn time credits, which are if people participate in vocational and rehabilitative programs, those credits will allow them to be released earlier as well. But the reason I'm pulling this up on the screen here is we read an article that had to do with Seattle. And as we know, Seattle has banned criminal as part of your screening process. So you cannot look at criminal history at all and consider it if you're in Seattle and you're renting out to people in Seattle. So what I was wondering is, from a domino standpoint, right? We have these small dominoes and there's change that is happening. Criminal justice reform looks like it's going to be happening. And what kind of insights or feelings do you have, Andrew, when it comes to this as far as being a property manager? Like, let's say that it comes to Buffalo, our area, that you can no longer check criminal history. Do you have any thoughts and feelings that come up based on that?
I would be pretty upset if that came to be the practice here in Buffalo. I think that the ability for a landlord to look at a tenant from as many different aspects as possible when they're screening them is one of the most important principles to finding good quality tenants that are going to stay in your unit for a long period of time. Criminal history certainly feeds into that. You have to be able to understand what your tenant's past is so that you can kind of underwrite that tenant. Ultimately, as a property manager, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our client. And part of that responsibility is making sure that the tenants that we place are going to stay there and pay rent and be good tenants and be good citizens. And not having access to a criminal background check, I think that's going to severely limit us. One other thing I'd thought about when I was reading this article is, at least in our state here in New York, and there's already several states that have recreational marijuana. Recreational marijuana is on the governor's docket of things to try to push through in the state in 2019. So when you pull a criminal history on someone and you see that they have a possession of marijuana charge from back before recreational marijuana was legal, how do you then look at that going forward, knowing that the laws have since changed? So I think that this is the tip of the iceberg on what's going to become a very, very large issue in the next couple of years as more and more states adjust their laws when it comes to marijuana and things like that. And then I think it's also going to have a very disparate impact on our ability to screen tenants properly if other states pass legislation saying you can no longer look at a criminal history.
Mm-hmm. One of the things too, I'll pull it up on screen. It was a graphic from that article. It's kind of interesting though, is that if people are worried about this from a perspective of a landlord, the yellow line in the bottom here indicates the amount of federal prisons and or prisoners. And then local jails, if you guys can see that, is that kind of yellow line, and then orange is the state prison. So the First Step Act is pertaining to federal prisons. So they account for a very small percentage of the overall prison population. But it's very well documented as well as far as the incarceration rates in the United States compared to other countries and why they are attacking this issue. So, Jen, do you have any kind of feelings on this or insights as far as criminal justice reform and the impact on landlords?
Yes, absolutely. And I can't remember if it was 2015 or 2016. It was in April, HUD released the new guidance on disparate impact and criminal history. And I think that's important to just, I don't know what your listeners, their education level on these things, but the federal government a couple of years ago issued new guidance that said making policy decisions where everybody with such and such criminal history or whatever can't be approved is now not okay. There needs to be an individual assessment done of how old they were, the circumstances, their rehabilitation since. The example was given, like if it's a bank robbery, maybe your applicant was the getaway driver and has since been at the Boys and Girls Club and done all these different things. And as such, it would be reasonable to offer this person a rental. And so the reason is it's under fair housing and disparate impact. And disparate impact means even if I'm not saying people of a certain minority or such cannot rent from me, if I make a business decision that disparately impacts or more than the average impacts a protected class, that is now illegal. And as such, in our country, minorities have a higher rate of having a criminal history. We clearly have an issue with policing and judges and sentences when it comes to racial issues in this country. Just nobody can deny that we have that issue. And I can respect what's being done as an effort to remedy this. We all want it fixed. We do. And it's got a lot of parts. It's going to be messy for a while. So while I don't love this disparate impact concept in relation to criminal history, I understand it. And we've gotten a lot more comfortable with it over the last couple of years, using it and doing this individual assessment. I do get kind of rowdy about, where does HUD expect me to find all these circumstances of these crimes? Where am I supposed to find out? Like,
yeah, right. Are you pulling court transcripts? And...
when they robbed the bank, did he like shoot two into the ceiling or just one, or in the floor, or like, did he just miss somebody? Like what? I can't be judging that. What I will say though, is now you go way too far when you've done what Seattle's done and say you can't even look, because you've got the protection of people to consider. I know in our multifamily properties and whatnot, we're cautious. We don't move, people on the Megan's Law list in there. We don't move people with a history of violence. Now, in our case, we do it because we have a business case for evaluating those sorts of criminal things. And we work closely with our attorneys on this. And I think this is something that people read headlines and get miseducated about. But this is bad. I mean, not even being allowed to look. Ooh.
Yeah.
It doesn't help.
There was a mention in the article that says federal properties are exempted from the law too.
They always are.
Yeah.
They're always exempt.
Of course.
I'm going to pull up on the screen here too, bring this full screen. This is actually an article on our website that kind of goes over some tenant screening laws, but you can see the as far as why they're concerned about disparate impact. The first graphic is showing the USA population, which accounts versus the entire population of the world. So USA population around 316 million, population of the world 7.2 billion. But the USA, what is it here? So USA population is 4% of the world's population, but has 22% of the prisoners of the world. That's just crazy. And then the graphic beneath it here is showing the disparate impact of incarcerated individuals of Hispanic, Black, white, and all individuals. And you can obviously see that Black and Hispanic individuals are the majority of prisoners. So that's what Jen is getting at when she's talking about disparate impact. And even if you're just making something a part of your screening criteria that has to do with criminals or having any kind of criminal history, you can say that that's a disparate impact because of the fact that most people that come from prisons are minorities. So definitely worth considering. And it's going to be something that's going to be, continuing conversation as things evolve and as laws progress. So I'm sure this won't be the last time we talk about it. This last one, this was an article that was shared to the Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group. This came from New York Post, but D. Abrams shared it to the group. And basically the article is talking about a property manager, or actually a developer, who makes millions off of rundown military homes. So again, this might be a case of a little bit of clickbait, because you kind of read through the article and you see that, there are people who have been surveyed who say they actually really enjoy their apartments. But this is showing in Fort Bragg, and this is essentially saying that Corvius, who is the owner of this investment firm since 2002, has controlled more than 26,000 houses and apartments across 13 military bases. So he has made quite a large sum of money. They kind of detail that in the article, showing some of his real estate. But one of the things I wanted to talk about with you guys is if you have any experience of having managed either properties near military bases or people who are currently active military. What has your experience been in that situation? And is it really any different than just your normal tenant that you've had in the past? Andrew, I'll let you go first on this one.
Sure. We have a couple of military tenants, but not an overwhelmingly large amount of like housing that's just off base or something like that. Most of our military tenants have been excellent tenants. They take care of the place that they're living in. They make sure that their rent is paid on time every month. They call us when there's a maintenance issue, things along those lines. We've never really had any major concerns when it comes to our military tenants. We actually find that our military tenants have a tendency to stay in place longer, unless they get deployed to some sort of, either they get moved to another base or they wind up with a deployment or something like that. We find that our military tenants have a tendency to stay in place longer and be a better tenant overall, just based off of the fact that they're paying the rent on time, they're taking care of the place that they're living and things along those lines. But I also have a very, very limited subset. We have maybe 3 or 4 military tenants currently, and probably a grand total of a handful over the time that I've been doing property management.
Okay. Jen, what are your thoughts on this? I know you said before we hopped on the call that you have some history with military tenants as well.
Yeah, where I used to manage, there were several supply depots. So they had some enlisted folks, but a lot of civilian military people. I don't find a lot different in renting to military folks versus non-military folks. I would disagree with Andrew a little bit. I don't find them more prone to being a better tenant versus a worse tenant. If anything, they're just very average. And at least the ones I interacted with, they were young. They were young family. They were doing normal young person sort of things, really didn't understand or in whatever way. So the one thing to remember, though, is if you are managing near a military base, that U.S. Civil Service Members Relief Act. And that is something when I was doing near military houses, I was managing property. It was from 2004 to like 10. There was a lot of deployment activity happening there. And we would get those 30-day notices out of nowhere. And it doesn't matter. They could sign a year lease with you today and tomorrow. If they get deployment orders and it meets the criteria, which are actually pretty light, they just need to show that they're getting orders to move to somewhere, I don't know, 35 miles or more away, something like that.
Yeah, and it has to be, I think, 90 plus days in duration, the deployment.
I'd have to look. I haven't seen anything too short, but but I've seen it happen both ways. I've seen one member of the family get deployed and the family remains. I've seen one member of the family get deployed and there's whole rest of the family, and they also will move. They will move usually back to where family is to weather the time without the adult in the house. So that's just it. I mean, if you get into deployment activity and your units around you are called up and go, you just need to know that. You need to know your economic environment, where you are and what those risks are. And just be familiar with the U.S. Civil Service Members Relief Act.
Mhm.
Do not, like when these people come in and want to break their lease without penalty, you have to let them go with 30 days notice, and they have to provide a copy of their orders.
Yeah, 100% right.
Which is a real, I'm paraphrasing there. I'm sure it's more exact than that, but that's how we've done it.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wasn't actually familiar with that. I've never had a military tenant, so
Oh.
that's good to know in advance. So that concludes this episode of Landlord Live. Thank you guys for joining me here. And yeah, this is the first one of the new year. So I hope you guys have a good rest of your week and a good 2019. Got any, well, before we go, you got any good resolutions, or you're just kind of like, man, it's another year? Anything?
Private. No, I'm not sharing them.
Same for
I
you,
have
Andrew?
You guys every week. Talk to you guys every week. How about that?
No, I have some that I'm going to be sharing. Well, I'm actually just putting the finishing touches on my personal and business goals for 2019, and there's some of them that are going to get shared, but not quite yet.
All right, yeah, that's what the Facebook group's for. If it's revolving around real estate, right?
Exactly.
What are yours, Eric? What are you going to do this year?
I was on the meditation train pretty good last year and I fell off. So I'm going to try doing that a little bit more. I've got a personal goal for a YouTube channel that I have as far as subscribers on there and pushing that forward. And then some business goals too.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, cool. All right, guys. Well, until next week, have a good week.
You also.